Back to Brighty of the Grand Canyon. Here we are. No escape. The snow continued to fall for 4 days more. It piled up. Now only the roof tree, and the chimney of the house were uncovered. Inside, the feeling of desperation grew. The tunnel of the wide porch had seemed a last avenue of escape. Now it too slowly closed in. 3 pairs of snowshoes against the wall, waiting. The men in the burrow grown thin, waiting. Flour almost gone, even the candle grease eaten. And now hunger gnawing, hurting, and morning and night stalking each other, an old-timer's watch sounding big in the quiet. With the windows sealed, the air grew foul. Homer called out in his nightmares, Uncle Jim, I can't breathe. They're clamping the box lid down. They got my fingers caught. Save me, Uncle Jim, save me. Even Brighty slept fitfully. He took to night walking from Salt House to Hearth, from Hearth to Salt House, back and forth, until Iron's nerves too were breaking. Stop him, he screamed at Uncle Jim. I'm going crazy. Stop him. Humph, said Uncle Jim, snorted. You've been crazy all along, crazy as a hoot owl, thinking to get away from the law. He shook his pistol like a forefinger. A quick, outright killing is too nice for the likes of ye. There's got to be a trial with eyes boring into you and questions spit at you and ye a sweating and a squirming. A new idea struck him. Or could be, his voice dropped to whisper, could be the snow's the law. Maybe the snow's your leg irons holding you down till you starve to death. Just saying the words and trying to make his voice sound big took all the old man's strength. He leaned against the wall to hide his exhaustion. A crazed look came into Iron's eyes. I ain't going to starve. I ain't going to die. He reached under his blanket where he had hidden some raisins in a soup can. He popped one into his mouth and another, squishing them with his tongue, then chewing fiercely to get the full strength. Without a word of warning, Uncle Jim drew a bead on the tin can and shot it out of Iron's hand. The man fell back unhurt on his blanket. What happened? What happened? Homer called out in alarm. Nothing much, Uncle Jim chuckled. A rat was just making off with the last of our raisins, and I just sure scared the living daylights out of him. I heard tell of starving people eating rats, Homer said. You nor me couldn't stomach this one, Homer. It was a sickin', enough to poison your blood. I missed him a purpose. He relaxed against the wall and felt stronger for the sureness of his aim. Uncle Jim, a pink flush crawled up Homer's face to his temples. Yep. Supposing we don't make her out of here. You're talking foolish now. But just suppose. All right, I'm supposing. He looked at Homer and saw that the boy seemed overcome with what he had to say. What is it frets you, son? It's just, Homer's voice faltered. I wanted to tell you. I'm sorry. Pshaw, I know you was. I knowed you was. Knowed it all along. But hadn't been for ye, we might ne'er catch old Jake Irons, nor had us this reunion with Bright Angel. I'm tired now, boy. How'd it be if you stood watch for a bit? The old man talked on, but his words were muffled with drowsiness as sleep overcame him. The boy sat up straighter, his back against the cupboard, his rifle pointed toward the dark lump that was Irons. Blazing guns. Homer seemed alone, all alone with sleep. He was shut in with sleep. It was deep as the night is and long as the day is. The steady sounds of sleep came to him. Uncle Jim's a slow purring and Irons the harsh snore of a man lying on his back, but Brighty's was uneven, troubled perhaps by dreams. As he kept his lonely watch, Homer's fingers played along the rifle, feeling the chill of the still, feeling the 4 tiny holes where the gold plate had been. He rubbed the smoothly polished wood, and his thumbnail made an imaginary notch. I could do it now, he said to himself, and a fierce joy leaped up in him. I could kill Jake while Uncle Jim sleeps. I could pull the trigger. It'd be easy. Just one little pull, and then I could sleep too. His forefinger slid around the trigger guard, then fitted itself into the curve of the trigger. He raised the rifle and took aim. A shadow leaped up on the wall. It was the barrel of the rifle, a finger accusing. Coward, it said, coward. Homer tried to ignore the pointing finger, but it sidetracked him without his willing it. He looked at Uncle Jim and thought of his gallant courage. How little he seemed and old, and the forelock of his hair was all of one color with Brighty's, a dusty gray like sagebrush. The thought of sagebrush set Homer to longing for summer winds and summer skies, and he forgot he had intended to kill a man. He shrugged at the shadow on the wall and with a sigh lowered the rifle. The fire licked its way around the logs, and one log fell with a shower of sparks. Blue vapor curled and rose, and the boy watched the flames, letting his ears listen for trouble. But there was none, only the fire making little crackles like squirrel feet running on dry leaves, and the sleep sounds, deepening, slowing. Homer's eyelids began to droop. He blinked rapidly, trying to focus on the objects in the room. He picked out his snowshoes and made believe they were magic. He could put them on and walk off across the snow to a table set with chicken legs, and he could gnaw them clean as if he were a dog, and then he could suck on the bones. But the table faded away, and in its place he saw nothing but snow, downy, drowsy snow drifting gently down. The gauzy stuff enfolded him, whirled him slowly round until he was sucked up and up into a cloud, and the cloud was made of feathers of sleep, so restful, so restful. He cushioned his head in their soft comfort, and his eyelids closed. Minutes wore on. Then in the quiet, iron stirred. The ratty head of hair poked out of the blanket, and the pin eyes glanced sharply round. They saw Homer's chin resting on his chest, and the rifle lying clear of his hands. A quick scheming and hunger for revenge distorted Iron's face. He threw off his blanket, and dragging it behind him, stole across the floor. He tried not to hurry. A creaking floorboard could give him away. He eased toward Homer, keeping close to the wall, not wanting his footsteps to be heard or his scent to reach the burrow. And then in two spurts against the firelight, Brighty's ears came up tall and stiff. There was no time to lose. From where he stood, Irons flung the blanket over Homer's head, and suddenly he was on top of the boy, his right hand snatching the rifle. Homer thought it was the cloud smothering, and he woke up fighting off the blanket, crying out in terror, "Uncle Jim! Uncle Jim!" But Uncle Jim, pillowed on Brighty, lay helpless. Jake Irons stood towering over him, the bore of the rifle aimed straight at him. "So you wanted to see me squirm?" The gold teeth showed in a savage grin. "Now who's scared and sweating?" Uncle Jim looked out of sad, tired eyes and forced a little smile. "Not me, Irons. Likely. You'd be doing me a favor." "Okay, old coot. Here's your favor," and Irons pulled the trigger. There was a flash, an explosion, a scrambling of feet, and then a heavy thump. When the smoke cleared, the dark dribble of blood that ran along the floor came from Brighty, and not from Uncle Jim. Brighty's shoulder was stained with blood, and his head lolled backward, his eyes wildly rolling. Instantly, Uncle Jim returned the shot. No sighting or bringing up of the pistol, just one shot from the hip, yet the aim at the rifle was sure. Bead of steel delivered with cold, calculated fury. "You done her, Uncle Jim! You done her!" Homer shouted as the rifle banged to the floor. "Look!" he cried, picking it up. "The loading breech is dented. Can't nobody fire now. Look!" Uncle Jim did not look at the rifle, nor down at Brighty, not yet. He straddled the quiet body like a mare protecting her foal. Then with the pistol held steady on Irons, he snapped out his orders. "Homer, pull the cupboard away from the wall. Irons, squat down, your back again the cupboard." The man slumped to the floor, a defiant leer on his face. He sat against the cupboard, motionless except for his eyes. Only the pistol left now, he thought, and the old man tiring, but his look of cunning gave way to surprise and then to fear as the clipped directions went on. "Lash him to the cupboard with that there wire. Bind him fast, Homer." The boy's awkward hands wrapped the wire around Irons and around the cabinet too, once, twice, 3 times. Then he twisted the ends securely and stood up, waiting for the next command. It came with a word of reproof. The 6-shooter, warm from the firing and from Uncle Jim's grip, was laid in his hands. Well, that was interesting. I think we could almost finish the story. Let's just do that. A score to settle. And now at last, Uncle Jim was on his knees. He was no longer the general barking out commands, but a little stooped man whose knees cracked when he knelt and his eyes were wet. "Brighty," he said softly, "it's me, your Uncle Jimmy. Look at me, Brighty." The white lids opened and the dull brown eyes looked around until they found Uncle Jim. "Please don't go under, feller. Not this away. God give me lots of strength I can still do for you." In proof, he half ran to the salt house and brought back kindling and a log, and he fed the fire for light, and he worked quickly, paying no heed to his own labored breathing. The pitchy wood crackled, and in the flashes of fire he saw dark blood pumping out of Brighty's shoulder with each heartbeat. "Let me have a look now," he said, forcing a note of confidence into his voice. Gentle hands laid back the blood-matted hair little by little. "It's only a flesh wound, Brighty, just below the cross on your shoulder." But to himself he was crying. "It's all ragged and blasted out, and blood vessels pumping themselves dry. I'm afraid, God." Homer's voice cut in. "How bad is it?" Brighty lay with a mouth open, gasping for air. His shoulder felt sticky and hot and twisted. He heard the murmur of voices, but they were far off, like voices in a dream. He tried to lift his head, and a small movement spurted the blood. "He'll go under, Homer." Uncle Jim looked at Brighty with fear. Unless what, Uncle Jim?" "Less'n we can dam up that flowing red river." The old man jerked it to his feet and headed for the salt house. "We got to stop it. We got to." He snatched up the hatchet and began hacking at the floor inside the salt house, hacking fiercely with every ounce of his strength. The hard-packed dirt loosened into bits and pieces. He raked them together with his fingers, praying as he worked. Back with Brighty again, he was nurse and doctor, soothing and explaining. "This is clean dirt, feller. Been under salt. It'll work like a sponge." Carefully, he eased the whole handful into the gaping wound, biting his lip and wincing at the pain he inflicted. He watched the blood ooze and bubble darkly through the dirt. "Listen, Bright Angel," he pleaded. "You can't leave me like this. You and me's got a score to settle for old-timer. And when it's done, then 'twon't be a whisker of time before you'll be loping down your old trail and splashing in Bright Angel Creek again. Seems like I can innermost hear the creek calling for you to come and play." He stopped and was silent. He sat down beside Brighty, his eyes never wavering from the wound. Slowly the dirt pack did its work. By and by the bleeding ceased, and after a while Brighty's muscles relaxed and his eyelids closed. He slipped off to sleep, using Uncle Jim's knee for a headrest. "You shouldn't have come between," the old man said as he stroked his furry ears. "I'm an old buck, Brighty. You shouldn't have done it for the likes of me." He shook his head sadly. "My poor little wildin', all tuckered out." There was no telling how long Brighty slept. Snowbound time was no seconds or minutes. It is an hourglass with snow for sand and unseen fingers turning it out. Uncle Jim slept too, while Homer watched his sullen prisoner. There was no more sleep in the boy. He wondered if he could ever close his eyes again. Homer looked down at the pistol in his hands. Then he was suddenly looking at his hands. Something was happening to them, something which he could not stop. They were shaking. Now his whole body was shaking. My grandfather shook like this, he thought in panic. But he was old. At the same moment, a rumbling blast set the dishes in the cupboard to dancing and rattling. A new panic caught him. "An earthquake," he thought. His mind said the word, and his throat shouted it. "Earthquake! Earthquake!" In one confused instant, the cupboard doors flew open, and tin cups, plates, and spoons came pummeling down on Iron's head. Uncle Jim blinked at the crash. A furrow of puzzlement formed between his brows, and suddenly his eyes were bright as meteors. He was laughing and looking old young again. "Dynamite!" he shouted. "Someone's blasting the snowbank. They're coming to save us." Here's the last chapter. Ready? The Way Home. The rescue team of the sheriff and his young deputy had faced their errand of mercy with great courage. They knew well that finding Uncle Jim and Homer alive was extremely doubtful, with snow 15 feet deep and temperatures below zero. Unless the old man and the boy had taken refuge in the ranch house or in Uncle Jim's cabin, there was almost no chance of finding them at all. But Uncle Jim was so beloved by the whole town of Fredonia that everyone wanted to help. Housewives offered their warmest blankets. The postmaster contributed his mail toboggan. The harness maker stuffed a straw mattress for it, and the storekeeper donated bacon, oatmeal, coffee, and sugar. Fortunately, the deputy, remembering a story of our Arctic adventure, took along a few sticks of dynamite. Without them, the rescuers might not have gained entry to the ranch house in time. It was the smoke curling out of the chimney that told them someone was there, and as fast as numbed fingers could work, they set off the blast that startled Homer half out of his wits. When they burst in upon the starving group, the sheriff was the one most deeply moved. Pleased as he was to see Uncle Jim and Homer and even Brighty, he was astounded to learn that the man bound to the cupboard was the long-hunted desperado who had murdered his friend. The sheriff buzzed like a bee in clover. He could hardly contain himself while Uncle Jim told about the moon lily tea and the confession. He whipped out his notebook and wrote furiously, as if each thrust of the thread were a stab in the flesh of Irons. Then, with great officiousness, he turned to the prisoner. "In the name of the law and as sheriff of Coconino County, I arrest you, Jake Irons," he said pompously, "for the murder of one Hezekiah Appleyard and attempted murder of one James Owen." In spite of his eagerness to deliver the criminal to justice, he could see that Uncle Jim and Homer and Irons, too, would have to be fed and strengthened for the trip. Uncle Jim pretended a great weakness in order to give Brighty some time to recover. "It's my legs," he complained. "They're rubbery as them toy knives kids play with. But let me see now." He went over to the burro and washed the dirt from his wounds. With a glow of pride, he noticed that the blood vessels were already sealed and the tissues a brilliant red. "In my next life," he thought, "maybe I could be a horse doctor instead of a lion hunter." Out loud, he said, "Sheriff, with all them victuals you brung, I reckon my legs will be stallert as ever by day after tomorrow." "No need to use your legs," the sheriff replied. "That's why we got the toboggan. You can loll on it like a mermaid the whole way home." Uncle Jim was not listening. His mind was at work. Day after tomorrow, only 2 days to ready Brighty. He began pacing as if that would help him think. He paced around the deputy and Homer, who were busy getting supper, and around the sheriff, who was going through his prisoner's pockets. At last, Uncle Jim had the schedule worked out in his mind. In the 2 days that followed, his only thought was for Brighty. He made him hot mashes of rolled oats and fed him sugar for energy. He poured bacon grease lukewarm into the wound. Then, in half-hour stretches, he walked Brighty around in a circle like a groom turning up a racehorse for a big event. The sheriff guffawed. "For one who's got rubby legs," he said, "yours is mighty spry." Then he winked at Uncle Jim in understanding. Morning of the second day dawned bright and clear. The sun threw a glitter on the snow, and the sky arched deep and blue. Shadows of deeper blue slanted out of the timber and sharpened the white of the snow. A party of 5 men with a toboggan was making its slow way across the freshly varnished world. "Just take her easy, feller," said the sheriff, his breath coming a column of steam in the air. "The snow's got a good crust, and the pines'll show us the way home." He began laughing. "If this ain't a comical sight, here's a parcel of people footing it, and the beast of burden riding." Uncle Jim, paddling like a pelican, lifted one webbed foot over the other. "Don't see nothing so hilarious to that," he said tartly. Then he took in the sight. Jake Irons wearing a harness and pulling the toboggan with a burro aboard. He began to grin. "Reckon it is a thing at that." His eyes was on the straining figure, but what he really saw was little Mimi using the reward money to buy one of the newfangled wheelchairs and scooting around in it faster than she had good legs. If she had good legs. He saw Old Timer's watch dangling from the arm of the chair and Mimi prizing it above everything. "Sure, it's funny," the sheriff roared. "Hardest rescue I ever seen." He poked his guns in Iron's ribs. "Today's easy," he said. "Tomorrow you'll be weighing in on the scales of justice." Snowshoes creaking, the party tramped onward, Brighty's blanket a red splash against the whiteness. "It's a wonder how lung pipes can stand the shock of fine, fresh air," Uncle Jim said after a while. "I can't suck in enough of it," Homer said breathlessly. "You reckon Brighty can take it?" Uncle Jim's face clouded. He watched the slight blanketed figure brace itself as Irons floundered up a rise. "Maybe," he thought in sudden alarm. "The thin, cold air is too much for him. Him being weakened and all. And this is his first winter away from the canyon." And then almost at the top of the hill, Brighty's head came up and his ears forked sharp against the sky. It gave the old man a start to see the sudden change. It was as if a frisky young jack had taken the place of the tired old one. "Why, he looks spunky," Uncle Jim smiled at himself. "He's just a little old youngster, been cooped up too long and is addled with freedom." It was true. Brighty had changed. He seemed aware all at once that he was free, no one gripping his tail or prodding him with a rifle, and no walls hemming him in. The wide, free world and the sky above were his. He tossed his head, testing and tasting the air, letting strength flow back into him. The red blanket began rippling. then bellowed to the movement of his lungs, and he tried a little whinny in his throat, and it grew bigger and wilder, and it came out as of old, a steam whistle bray, high and joyous. Ee-yaw, ee-yaw, ee-yaw. Uncle Jim, too, took in a great lungful of air. Brighty ain't going under. His voice cracked in happiness. Yep, fellers, he's going to make her. And the rocks and the hills rang with the words. Yep, fellers, he's going to make her, they shouted again, and then again. And now. Canyon winds still blow restless, and the Colorado River still cuts its way, depth upon depth, through the mile-high walls, and from the far corners of the world men come to explore this open book of the earth's crust. Some are scientists and others artists, and some are troubled people who come to find themselves to drop their worries into the great chasm. Riding muleback, they zigzag down the face of the wall over some of the very trails marked out by Brighty's feet. Often in the middle of the descent, their mules come to a dead halt, long ears lopped over a ledge, eyes sighting a tiny, lone fellow far below. Then up from the distance, a piercing voice calls, Ee-yaw! 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 Look, the guide cries, down yonder, a wild burro. Maybe, he grins to the riders behind him, maybe it's Bright Angel. Of course, everyone knows that Brighty has long since left this earth. But some animals, like some men, leave a trail of glory behind them. They give their spirit to the place where they have lived and remain forever, part of the rocks and streams and the wind and the sky. Especially on moonlit nights, a shaggy little form can be seen flirting along the ledges, a thin swirl of dust rising behind him. Some say it is nothing but moonbeams caught up in a cloud, but the other guides swear it is trail dust out of the past, kicked up by Brighty himself, the roving spirit of the Grand Canyon, forever wild, forever free. Well, there you go. That was the end of the story. Bye.